One time a few years back, I lost my phone. I have an iPhone and I work in the city. I walk around on the sidewalks and stuff every day, so I go all over the place. The only thing I remember is that I got home from work that day and I just didn't have my phone. I looked around in my car and stuff and I couldn't find it anywhere. I realized that I must have lost it someplace, but I had no idea where it could be. And if I dropped it on the street, somebody more than likely picked it up. My apartment was not too far away from my best friend Amanda's house, so I walked over to her place. When I got there, I told her how I had lost my phone and I asked her to call it. From her apartment, we called my phone, and to our surprise, somebody picked up. It was a man's voice who sounded fairly young, but not like a teenager or anything. He said that he had found the phone on the sidewalk and wanted to give it back to me. I was really grateful and relieved to hear that, and then the guy said that he was currently at work. By that point, it was like 6 p.m. He said that he didn't get off until really late, and I had work the next day. The guy told me to come by his apartment the next night because he would get off a bit earlier. There wasn't too much of a discussion about it, but I figured that would be a safe enough place to get it. So we agreed on that, and overall I was just happy that I was going to be getting my phone back, even if I would have to wait another day. So Amanda said that she would call the guy the next day for me and told me to come over after work the next day as well. That night I had to use an alarm on my laptop and it worked okay. I went to work the next day as usual, and when I got back I went straight over to Amanda's. I was told that the guy had given his address and we were supposed to meet at 10:15 that night when he got home from work. I wasn't real happy about meeting that late, but I figured there was nothing we could do. The address was an apartment complex, so I didn't feel too nervous or anything, but I still asked Amanda to go with me. So that night Amanda drove me in her car to the address. It was about 15 minutes away, and when we arrived, it was in fact an apartment complex. However, it looked very sketchy. There were several apartment buildings all looking really run down. The lighting was terrible, and beat-up old cars scattered the pothole-filled parking lot. Right across from the complex was a giant wooded area. The apartment units had doors that opened up to the outside. Amanda told me the unit number, and she said that she would stay in the car while I went to the apartment. So at 10:15, I exited the vehicle and approached the apartment building. I was somewhat nervous, but brushed it off, and I was just happy to be getting my phone back finally. So I walked up to the front step and then knocked on the door. The lights inside of the apartment all seemed to be off. It looked like nobody was home. I looked around, making sure that I had the correct place, and as I was looking around, I saw Amanda sitting in the car a good 50 feet away. She was in the driver's seat, and she suddenly started frantically waving me back over to her car. I didn't know what she wanted, but it seemed important, so I left the apartment and walked over to her. When I got to the car, she told me to get in. As soon as I did, she told me that it looked like a setup. She said that she saw two guys just inside the woods watching me. When she pointed to the area, I sort of saw movement of people moving away farther into the woods. It was hard to tell who they were, but I was glad that Amanda had spotted them. Then she drove away and we left. As we were driving, she tried calling the guy and also tried calling my phone, but got no answer on either one. So at that point, we stopped along the way home and we called the police. They sent an officer to the apartment building to look around. We found out that nobody lived in that particular apartment we were supposed to meet at, and it was vacant. They also found my phone located just a few feet in the woods in that same area. It was returned to me, and I feel very lucky to have gotten away from that situation. I'm also really glad that Amanda went with me that night. This story takes place a few years ago when I was at home by myself one night. I live in a neighborhood that's decently populated. There are many houses, and I have a good-sized front and backyard. There's some nice landscaping like trees, bushes, and flowers around the property. It's not a ton of space, but about a half acre. So one night I was just in the living room at about 8 o'clock when there was a knock on my door. It was strange because I thought it was a little late for somebody to come to the front door. I walked over and I noticed that there was a woman standing there who had dark hair and appeared to be fairly young looking. I opened the door and asked her what she wanted. She told me that she lived a few blocks away, and earlier her dog had escaped and she had to chase it. Apparently she had found her dog in my yard and chased it around the front and back until she caught it. Then when she got back, her phone was missing. She said that she retraced her steps and was 90% sure that the phone was in my yard and wondered if it was okay for her to look around. She said she didn't want to just snoop around and make me suspicious. Now, I had been home the entire day, and I hadn't heard or seen a dog or this woman in my yard, but it was not like I was near a window the whole day or anything, so I told her that she could and I would come out and help her look. I didn't think it would take that long because there weren't that many places that the phone could have been, in my opinion. I also told her to give me the number and I could call the phone and maybe we could find it faster. She said no though, it was dead. So we started to go around the yard and look for it. In the front yard we didn't find it, and then we made our way around to the back. When we arrived in the backyard there was more space and more trees as well. After about 5 minutes of looking around though, the woman said that she had found the phone. Apparently it was underneath a bush next to a tree. I have no idea how it would have got there, but I was just happy that her phone was found. Then we said bye to each other and I went back around to the front of my house and went inside. Now, several hours later, when it was pretty late, I remembered that I thought that I heard some noises from the other end of the house. At the time though, I just assumed it to be my cat, because he's always wandering around in the house and he wasn't in the room with me at the time. Not long after this, I went upstairs to go to bed. After getting ready for bed, when I was about to go to sleep, I heard the sound of the back door to my house opening. There was no mistaking it. Without any hesitation, I quietly walked over and locked my bedroom door. Then I called 911 on my phone. I talked as quietly as I could and reported that somebody was in my house. I knew that this would be an intruder because there was not a single person I knew who would just walk in the back door. I lived alone, and anybody who would come over would always let me know first and also use the front door. Still, I had no idea who it was at the time. I was told that the police would be at my house shortly, and I just hoped that whoever had gotten inside my house wasn't dangerous. I was also feeling dumb because I just assumed that I had forgot to lock my back door. I rarely used it, but occasionally would go back on the patio. As the next few minutes went by, I didn't really hear anything. I wasn't sure where the person was who had entered my house. The door was loud enough to hear, but you couldn't really hear people walking around on the lower levels unless they were being super loud. I mostly just sat on my bed, listened, and waited. For about 10 minutes, which felt like a lot longer, I just sat there, and at one point I heard something downstairs. I couldn't really make out what it was though, but somebody was definitely down there. Then the police arrived. Within minutes, multiple police vehicles were at my house, and they were able to catch the intruder. Except, there were 2 intruders in my house, not just one. It was the same woman who had supposedly lost her phone on my property earlier, and then there was some man who I didn't recognize as well. They were both arrested, and they had backpacks with many of my belongings inside of them. I guess they were trying to rob me. The woman apparently made up the whole thing about the dog and losing the phone. When I left the house to help her look for her phone, of course I didn't lock the door, and her accomplice walked right in the front door while we were in the backyard. Then he hid in my house, which was the noise that I had heard that I thought was my cat. After that, I guess when he thought I was asleep, he opened the back door to let his accomplice in, who was the woman. I'm really glad that I wasn't asleep yet, or they possibly could have gotten away with it. This happened back in 2017, and I was a senior in high school at the time. I remember that I lost my phone one day after school. I didn't know where I had lost it, just that when I arrived home I did not have it, and I looked through my backpack and everything. We lived in a pretty populated neighborhood, and I remember that I walked over to my best friend Ben's house like I often did. When I was at Ben's, I told him about how I had lost my phone and I couldn't find it. Another thing about my phone was that I had no passcode on it. I know that sounds stupid, but back then when I was young, I never thought that I would lose my phone, and I also found it annoying to always type in my passcode, so I just took it off. Ben had the idea that we should look at my Snapchat location on the phone. I remember that back then, Snapchat had just recently come out with the map where you can see where your friends are. My location was on, as well as most of my friends. I thought that it was a long shot, but it was worth a try. So when we went on Ben's Snapchat and looked at my location, sure enough, it had moved. It was on the next street over from mine and at the far end of it, and I recognized the house. There was another kid in our grade named Preston who lived there. The phone appeared to be inside of Preston's house. I assumed that he must have found my phone and took it back home with him. So on the way back home that night when I left Ben's, I decided to stop at Preston's. However, when I got to his house and knocked on the door, nobody answered. I even knocked twice, so either he wasn't home or he just didn't want to answer the door. I went back to my house and I thought that maybe he had dropped it off at my place, but I wasn't sure if Preston even knew where I lived. You see, Preston and I were not friends. We had had some classes together over the years, and we were in the same grade, so we knew who each other were, but we never talked to each other or anything like that. So I figured if nothing else, he would get the phone back to me the next day at school. So the next day, after getting to school, I sought out Preston. I found him in one of the hallways by his locker, and I asked him if he had my phone. He said no and acted all confused. I asked him if he found my phone or something, and he said no, he hadn't. Then I told him about how I had lost my phone, and I saw the location on the Snap map was at his house. To my surprise, he completely denied it, saying that he had never seen my phone and that he didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to tell him about it again, but he just got mad and walked away. I was so angry, but I even doubted myself for a second, thinking maybe I was mistaken. I quickly went and found Ben and asked him to look on the Snap map once more. When we did, it was still at Preston's house, but hadn't updated for an hour. Ben took screenshots, and then I tried to find Preston again, but I couldn't. Between each class, he wasn't at his locker, and I didn't have any classes with him that semester. I have an idea that he was hiding from me. So the crazy part is, later in the school day, Ben and I looked on Snapchat again to see if the map had updated. Except now, I was off the map entirely, indicating that either my location had been turned off in the settings, or the phone was turned off entirely. I didn't want to let him get away with it, but I didn't know what else I could do. When I got home from school the next day, something crazy happened. I actually noticed something on the ground randomly in the front yard. It was my phone. I knew right away that Preston had planted it there. I would have seen it earlier if it had been there the whole time. I went on it and I saw that my Snapchat location had been turned off, which I didn't do. I also noticed that my banking app was open on my phone. I know for a fact that I hadn't been on my banking app in weeks. I had like $300 in my account, and thankfully it was still there. I suspect that Preston was trying to take my money, but he couldn't withdraw anything without my PIN. At the end of the day though, I was just happy to get my phone back. The next day at school, I went over to confront Preston. He said to me, "Did you find your phone?" almost in a sarcastic way, like he knew that I had found it. I said yes, and then he said something like I must be stupid for accusing him when I had it the whole time. I said that doesn't mean anything. I told him he planted it in my yard, and I said I still had screenshots, and I showed them to him. He just claimed that they were fake and kept denying it. After that, I just tried to stay away from Preston. I didn't know if anything could be done about it. I was glad to have my phone back though, and I learned a valuable lesson about who not to trust. A couple of years ago, I unfortunately lost my phone. It was a tough situation because I obviously use my phone every day, just like everyone else pretty much does. But my phone is used a lot in my job where I communicate with others, so I was really in a jam. I wasn't sure where I had lost it, but it could have been anywhere. I drive around and visit different places as part of my work. Basically, it could be anywhere. I knew that I needed a new phone fast, so I went to the store and bought some cheap replacement just to make calls and texts. That was a temporary fix that would last for a few days, but I still really needed a new phone, and fast. I guessed that I might be cheap, or maybe I just didn't want to spend a lot of money at the time, but I decided to look for a phone on Facebook Marketplace. I figured there would be a decent amount of phones there cheaper than buying one brand new. So the day after I lost my phone, I went on there on my laptop to look for another iPhone. When I looked, I saw something really strange. There was an iPhone for sale that looked just like the one that I had lost. It said something like, "Jailbroken iPhone for sale, works good." It was being sold for a reasonable price, and it had just been listed that morning. After looking at the ad, I was 100% sure that it was my phone. The real giveaway was that I had a crack on part of my screen, and this one had the exact same crack in the same spot. I immediately contacted the seller. It was a guy named Joe. When I reached out to him, I told him how it was my phone and I had lost it. Without responding to me, Joe blocked me. I was so mad, but I had quick thinking to enlist the help of my friend. I reached out to my buddy David and told him about what was going on. I told David to wait a little while and then act interested in buying the phone. David did what I asked, and he arranged a meetup to buy the phone from Joe the next day. So the following day, I called the cops and invited them to the meetup as well. Things ended up working out. The cops talked to Joe, who at first claimed the phone was his and a friend gave it to him. But thankfully, he had forgotten to wipe everything off the phone. It was still linked to my iCloud. After he realized this, he changed his tune and said that he just found it and he had no clue that it was mine. The police made him give it back to me, and then I was able to go back with my phone. I thought that everything was fine then, but there's more to the story. 2 nights later, I was awoken in the middle of the night. I immediately heard the sound of glass breaking. I had no idea what was happening at first, but when I realized glass was breaking, I thought I was being robbed. I got up out of bed and ran to get my gun. Then I left my bedroom and went into the hallway and listened more. Things were silent. I went to the end of the hallway and announced that I was armed. There was no response, but I heard a car screeching off in the distance. Whoever was there hadn't even heard me. I went to the front of my house to see that my main window was broken. Nobody was there though. After thinking about it for like 5 minutes, I realized it was probably Joe getting back at me. I called the police and they came out and investigated. I couldn't prove that it was Joe though. I had no security cameras or anything, so we basically got away with it. Thankfully, I had insurance that covered the window. I'm pretty sure that Joe just drove to my house, smashed my window with a bat or something, and then drove off. How he knew I lived there, I don't know. Maybe he followed me home or something. After that happened though, I never saw him again. One night, a couple of years ago, I was walking back to my car. I was parked on the side of the road and it was nighttime by this point. When I got to my vehicle, I found this older cell phone on the side of the curb sort of underneath my car. I picked it up and looked around. There was nobody else there at that hour. No other car was really close to mine or anything either. I guessed that somebody had just dropped their cell phone or something. It was pretty old, like I said, at least 10 or maybe 15 years old. But some people still use phones from back then, so I wasn't going to judge. I looked around trying to figure out how somebody dropped it there. I was thinking if I should just put the phone next to a tree and leave, hoping they would come back to find it, or if I should take the phone home and try to locate the rightful owner. As I was still holding the phone in my hands, it literally started ringing. So of course, I answered it. It was a man's voice on the other end who said hello, and I asked who was calling. The person on the other end just said, "Who is this?" He sounded confused, which was reasonable, and I said that I had just found this cell phone on the ground and I was wondering who it belonged to. The person told me that it belonged to a guy named Vern. I asked how I could get the phone to Vern, and the man said that he would tell Vern to meet me after his job the next night. He mentioned a park and said to be there at 9 p.m. and then hung up. So I took the phone and then went back to my apartment. I realized afterwards how weird it was though. How did this guy know exactly when and where to arrange this meetup between me and Vern? He didn't even ask if it was good with me. He just said that's what we were doing and then hung up. I was suspicious right away that maybe this was not a good idea. But what else could I do? I had someone else's phone. I couldn't just keep it. I was expected to be there to drop off the phone the next night. So I figured that everything would be fine. I just had to be vigilant. The phone didn't get any more calls for the rest of that night though, or the next day. I was curious and I tried going on the phone to see the other contacts, but it was locked. When the next night rolled around, I drove to the park that I was instructed to go to. I had never been there before. The park looked really sketchy. There was a small parking lot and it wasn't very well lit. In the end of the parking lot by the corner was this one old white SUV and it looked like it was a late 90s Suburban. I had a terrible feeling about it. That was the only other car in the entire parking lot. I arrived right at 9 p.m. and figured that the other SUV was probably Vern, but I couldn't tell who was inside of it from where I was. I didn't really want to see who it was though. I just had a terrible feeling. So I just drove right up to this park sign that was at the entrance. Then I rolled down my window, put the cell phone on the park sign, and then quickly drove off. As I was leaving, I saw the SUV start to drive towards me. The crazy thing is that the SUV didn't even go for the phone. It started following me. As soon as I made it out of the park, I took a left and then another quick left. I don't think the SUV saw me make that turn, because it wasn't close enough at that point. I didn't see it following me after that either. Then I drove back home. Looking back at that experience, I really think that that was some sort of a setup. I might have been robbed or something if I had gotten out of my car. I wouldn't be surprised if that cheap phone that I found was only used for bait. I mean, to get one call right after I picked it up and then never again seems fishy. Also, how did that guy know exactly where Vern was going to meet me and when? And why wouldn't they go get the phone instead of being worried about following me? I'm really grateful that I got out of there when I did.